Good evening and welcome to NTD UK News. I'm Stuart Leeson here, today's top stories. The government is offering everyone in England rapid COVID-19 tests twice a week. 107 protesters were arrested during Kill the Bill protests in central London. And the owner of the truck that caused last week's train crash in Taiwan apologised as workers continue to clear the wreckage. The Prime Minister confirms the next stage of lockdown easing in England will go ahead on April the 12th. It comes as the government announces trials of vaccine passports at some large events. Here's NTD's Jane Well with more.
A drink outdoors, a trip to the zoo and that much anticipated haircut. Things we can look forward to as the Prime Minister confirms England will enter the next stage of easing on April the 12th.
And on Monday the 12th, I will be going to the pub myself and cautiously but irreversibly raising a pint of beer to my lips.
Scenes like this, a sight that a couple of years ago wouldn't have appeared strange, may return in some settings, as the government says they will trial vaccine passports at selected large events, including the FA Cup final, though passes won't be required to enter retail shops and pubs on the 12th of April. The certificates could be used to show you've had the vaccine, had a negative test or already have antibodies against the virus. For overseas travel, ministers say this won't be allowed until May the 17th at the earliest. Foreign holidays are banned in the UK, with people facing a £5,000 fine for going abroad without a good reason. The ban on foreign travel will be replaced by a traffic light system, with countries around the world rated as red, amber or green. It's not yet clear which countries are in which categories. Jane Werrell, NTD News, London.
The government announced Monday that everyone in England will be able to take free regular COVID-19 tests. This is part of the government's roadmap out of lockdown. NTD's Neil Woodrow has more.
Free twice-weekly rapid COVID-19 tests are to be made available to all in England from Friday. The government says since their introduction, 120,000 positive cases have been identified that would otherwise have not been found. Many have by now come across these tests that involve processing a nasal swab sample. These lateral flow tests can detect a positive result in under 30 minutes. The government says more people getting a test will increase the ability to identify and control virus variants. Chief Medical Advisor to NHS Test and Trace, Dr. Susan Hopkins, says lateral flow tests are effective in detecting people that are infectious and therefore most likely to transmit infection to others. The government said in March analysis showed that for every 1,000 lateral flow tests carried out, there is less than one false positive result and an accuracy rate of over 95% for people with high viral loads. But when administered by self-trained members of the public, it drops down to just 58%. The test kits can be ordered online for home delivery. Official data shows that in the last 7 days to April the 4th, over 26,000 people had a confirmed positive test result. That's a decrease of nearly 30% compared to the previous 7 days. Neil Woodrow, NTD News, Epsom, Surrey.
Protests took place in cities across the UK over the weekend, the latest in response to the police and crime bill. The Metropolitan Police confirmed they arrested over 100 protesters in central London.
In London, in front of Parliament, a demonstration turns violent. It's the latest gathering of demonstrators against a proposed new law that would give police extra powers to curb protests. Some pushed officers and threw projectiles at them. One officer visibly bruised from the late Saturday afternoon scuffle. The Met Police say 10 officers were injured, but not seriously. According to police, 107 people were arrested. Offences included violent disorder, assault on police and breaches of COVID restrictions. One woman was arrested on suspicion of possessing an offensive weapon. One female protester tried to damage a telephone booth. The protests against the police, crime, sentencing and courts bill began earlier in the day, with hundreds, possibly thousands of people attending, marching the streets of the capital. Police say the majority of them adhered to low social distancing and listened to officers. Protesters say their action is justified, that they are defending free speech and their right to protest.
Only dictators fear protest, and if people can't speak out, then the government will do whatever they want, and people need to have the right to speak out. If something is wrong, why shouldn't we speak out?
Former Labour Party leader Jeremy Corbyn was among the crowd, later giving a speech. He called for the bill to be withdrawn. The march was one of dozens of protests organised in recent days around the country. Manchester, Sheffield, Leeds and Brighton among them. Demonstrators fear the bill would be used to curb dissent by imposing time and noise limits on protests. Climate change activists, Extinction Rebellion and the left-wing group Black Lives Matter supported the demonstrations. Some senior officers have said the "Kill the Bill" tag is deliberately provocative, as a reference to the British nickname for the police. In Bristol, police say more than 1,500 people attended the protest there. Some protesters occupied a section of the M32 motorway and 7 were arrested.
Rescue operations for last week's train crash in Taiwan continue. And the owner of the truck that caused the island's worst train disaster in decades apologized on Sunday.
Taiwanese rescuers on Monday were trying to retrieve the last body of a passenger from the wreckage of a deadly train crash. On Friday, a train carrying almost 500 passengers slammed into a truck near the eastern city of Hualien. With at least 50 dead, it was the island's worst rail accident in 7 decades. The truck had slid down a sloping road from a building site onto the tracks just outside a tunnel. Officials suspect the truck's brakes were not properly applied or had malfunctioned. The construction site's manager and truck owner apologized on Sunday. He said he feels deep regret and will cooperate with the investigators. A local court said on Sunday evening it had ordered that the man be detained for 2 months. The government said the 5th carriage had been removed, with the other 3 expected to be extracted by Tuesday. Taiwan's transport minister said on Sunday that he took responsibility for the accident and would step down once the rescue work was complete. The Transport Ministry and the Rail Administration is facing a number of questions, including why there was no proper fencing at the site. The victims include 2 Americans and 1 French national. The presidential office said President Tsai Ing-wen and Vice President William Lai had donated a month's salary to help survivors and victims' relatives. The crash occurred at the start of a long weekend for the traditional tomb sweeping day, when people return home to tend to family graves. The damaged section of track is not expected to reopen until the 20th of April.
The government announced over the weekend that care home residents in England will be allowed to have 2 regular visitors from next Monday. This will give some grandparents the chance to meet their grandchildren for the first time. But visitors will still have to wear personal protective equipment and provide a negative CCP virus test result. Care homes were badly hit during the initial outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic last year. Last month, lockdown measures were eased to allow each care home resident 1 regular visitor indoors. And in other news, a Roman Catholic church in London on Saturday said it would complain to the police after officers shut down a Good Friday service. Police say those holding the service broke lockdown rules.
Footage of a church service that was streamed live on social media shows 2 officers entering the Christ the King Catholic Church in Balham, South London. One officer told the congregation,
"This gathering is unfortunately unlawful under the coronavirus regulations we have currently. You are not allowed to meet inside with this many people under law."
The officer also said those who failed to comply could be fined £200 or arrested.
I suggest, ladies and gentlemen, though it is Good Friday and I appreciate you would like to worship, that this gathering is unlawful, so please may you leave the building now. Thank you.
Those in attendance say they felt the action was unnecessary.
Precautions were made, everyone was keeping distance, everyone had masks on.
I obviously felt very offended as As I would say, this is the most important day of the year for us Christians.
I was so surprised why that happened and where is the right.
The church defended the service, arguing regulations had been met and accused the police of exceeding their powers. Current regulations in England allow places of worship to host services with as many people as the place of worship can safely accommodate. Police say they attended the church after reports of a crowd queuing outside. They also say they understood the sensitivity of the situation and engaged with the priest outside of the church first before addressing the congregation.
New data out says that on average, first-time buyers save more than £800 a year compared to renters. In London, that figure was more than £4,600. NTD's Patrick Hayden brings us more.
A new report says the cost gap between renting and starting on the property ladder has widened in the last year. The report from the Halifax Bank says that first-time buyers on average save more than £800 a year compared to if they were renting. In London, it was over £4,600, and Northern Ireland had the smallest gap at around £550. Average rental costs increased by 10% over the year, with costs for first-time buyers hardly moving. House buyer costs included mortgage payments, funding a deposit, maintenance and repairs, and insurance costs. The report only included typical three-bedroom house purchases and excluded stamp duty and other one-off costs. Patrick Hayden, NTD News, London.
As further lockdown restrictions are lifted, hairdressers and barbers can reopen today in Scotland. It's by appointment only though. Homeware shops, garden centres and non-essential click and collect services are also back in business. Scotland replaced its stay-at-home order with stay local guidance last Friday. Scotland's Deputy First Minister John Swinney says the virus is down but it's not yet out. According to Scotland's timetable for easing restrictions, on the 20th of April, all students head back to school full-time, and then on the 26th of April, travel within all of Scotland will be permitted. And in other news, Cambridge scored a double win over Oxford in the annual boat race. It was one of the tightest racing ever, and this year without crowds.
Cambridge men's and women's crews scored a double win over Oxford. Due to COVID-19 lockdown restrictions, the race was held without crowds in Ely, Cambridgeshire. Rowing on their home waters, the Cambridge men's crew took an early lead. Oxford pushed their way back into the race, but was in the end unable to recover lost ground. The Oxford women's crew took an early lead but were overtaken by the Cambridge team, who then made the most of their familiarity with the course. The contest was cancelled last year due to the first lockdown. The only other time the race was held in Ely was in 1944 during the Second World War.
Snow hit parts of the UK today as well as over the Easter bank holiday weekend. That's less than a week after temperatures hit nearly 24 degrees Celsius in some areas. Last Wednesday was the hottest March day in 50 years, but on Monday, eyewitness footage in Hertford, Cambridgeshire showed snow falling. And in Braemar, Scotland, snow fell overnight on Sunday. Other media report that temperatures in northern England and parts of Scotland could drop to -5 degrees Celsius on April 11th. Coming up, a new book published in the US says that forced labor in China is more widespread than we thought. That and more when we return.